Great. I'm just going to set my screen up here. So as I said earlier, if you look on the very bottom of the screen, there is a button at the bottom called reactions. And if you click on that, there are a couple different things on there. There's a raise hand, a thumbs up, a yes or no. So sometimes I might ask you a question and just ask if you want to give a thumbs up. You can either use your own thumb or you can use the emoji on there, or else if you have a question, raise hand as well too, just so that I can make sure that I'm getting everyone's comments in here. So as I said, we're going to discuss this concept of characterizing First Nations water rights in direct or aspirational forms for First Nations water legislation going forward. Are there any thoughts on this of what you think? Like, think about your experience that you're having in your region right now related to water, and how do you think that they could be improved upon? Rob, I can see you scratching your head there. Do you have something that you wanted to add?
Well, I wasn't really thinking about our region. Like, I'm down in the Chilliwack lower mainland kind of area, but you know, you hear about some of the places, especially like Northern Ontario and stuff, seems to have a lot of issues in that. And like, I just don't get it. It's unfathomable to me that that places have been on a boil water advisory for years and nothing's been done. And I just don't get it. Like, because I think, like, we're so lucky where we are, and when we don't have some of those issues, and I just, like, it just doesn't seem right. Like, how do we change that? So this would be a good step to potentially do that and try to drive legislation to make everything equal. It's just, it's not helpful, but it's a rant, I guess, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
So in your area, from your First Nation, what is your what does the landscape of the water access look like in your community?
So we're super fortunate. I just started with Cheam First Nation as a public works EOC coordinator, public work manager, EOC coordinator, sorry. And for the most part, we have municipal water delivered to the community. We have we have two smaller well systems, and yeah, we're having some issue right now with one of them, but like we've got the capability to fix it, and like we just added a water softener in the filter system. So like I say, we're pretty fortunate to be where we are and in the location. So, you know, not a whole lot of issues with the drinking water for the community.
That's great. That's good to hear. Are there any other, is there any participants that are having maybe a different experience than that in their community?
This is Cookby Roy. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
The reason why none of us live on the reserve in that high bar is because back in the day, they never give us any water rights. As soon as the people could move off the reserve, a lot of them went to the States, and most of them live around Clinton. We've been dealing for a reserve with the federal government closer to town for probably a long time, eh? We had 2 times they were in negotiations with them. The last one was that we had some money tied up in another place, and we're short of money, so we never got our reserve. Now that we're getting some money together, we're trying to buy some land closer to town, eh? So that our reserve's right on the Fraser River. And if you had to live down there, you'd have to be either retired or basically retired, you know, like, and you'd have a long trip to town. So yeah, and we're still trying to get water rights out there through the provincial government, so to see whether we can grow anything down there.
Interesting. So essentially, your community has not developed because there is no water. There's no access to water.
That's a fact. well, most of them just moved away because they couldn't live on it. You know, like you got no water. Then you got the Fraser River running through there, you know, but that's the way it was back then.
Mhm. What about anyone else? Does anyone else have any other comments or suggestions about what could be put in to uphold your First Nation rights in any kind of water legislation? Chief Nelson, do you have any ideas? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, you're still on mute. I don't think I can unmute you.
There are a couple of us who have our hands up.
Okay, Chief Nelson will come back if you can figure out how to unmute. Chief Spahan.
Robin had his hand up before I did.
Okay, Robin.
Hi, it's I work in Shiquapam, the Shiquapam area in Enderby, in British Columbia, Southern Interior region, and South Thompson, Shuswap region, and it's an area that is the water primarily comes from snow and meltwater, and experiences flooding, and then could be drought within a period of a week. And there throughout the water source areas, there's a considerable problem with quantity and quality, in that the way the province had and has managed groundwater is still a big fat question mark in terms of how much is available, and you know, the contamination concerns and considerations. There's a lot of work occurring on that right now surrounding the Holkar Aquifer, which provides water to not only Splatcheen community and band members, but other residents as well. And what I've learned in the short time I've been involved in that process is that there's so many different jurisdictions that are focused on a single component of water, that there's the bigger picture and of water security and water wellness is missing. So that's a big piece that we're working on right now to address. Because you know, referrals still keep coming in to source this water, and there's very little understanding of how much there is to provide and how much can be available for use. So it's a really big problem at the moment. Thank you.
That's great comments. Thank you, Robin. I think that would be a challenge. It seems like everything is kind of being piecemeal here and there, so it's hard to get a fulsome picture of your watershed, right? Great. Thank you for those comments. Chief Spahan.
Yeah, Hantla and Squash Lise Behan could be events Letku. Good morning and hello everyone. Lise Behan, Chief of the Coldwater Band here in Nicola Valley in the Merritt area. I just wanted to touch on some of the things that Robin was talking about, and jurisdiction is always a big part of what's happening, whether it's in BC or anywhere in First Nations within Canada. And yeah, we're here in the Nicola Valley, we're doing a water pilot project with the province of British Columbia, and there's still a lot of we're in 3 years into this and we're still having a lot of challenges of what's going on in regards to how we're going to deal with water. And referrals is one of the biggest ones. We're just dealing with a blanket of permits in regards to water for water licensing. And they tried to do 10 referrals in one permit, which is totally unacceptable because one of them, we found out they were selling water commercially, bottling it, and they got caught. And the province of British Columbia, in 1 year, I haven't had an update from the province, which is totally unacceptable because how can somebody neighboring to our second reserve just come in, drill a well, and start bottling water and selling it online when First Nation communities are having a hard time, especially here in Coldwater. We have the Coldwater River right beside us, and it's one of the most endangered rivers in British Columbia. And we have the coho salmon, the steelhead, and the chinook that return here back in the Coldwater. And those numbers are dropping dramatically. And now that we have big companies coming in our backyard, such as Trans Mountain, to do the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline, that brings up the question of jurisdiction, provincial and federal and Indigenous. You know, when I started talking about water and I wanted accountability, and I started raising questions because we have 3 music festivals here in the Nicola Valley in the Merritt area, and trying to keep the public out of the Coldwater River because it was time for salmon to return. Nobody wanted to have accountability. It wasn't the people who were running the festivals. It wasn't the city of Merritt. It wasn't the provincial representatives at Flynn Row, or it wasn't DFO.
Mhm.
Nobody wanted the finger pointed at them. So I went back to my council and I said, well, let's start doing our own Indigenous laws, and we're going to do it right from the headwaters of the Coquihalla all the way to the confluence of where the Coldwater and the Nicola River meet. And that scared the province because they said, oh, well, let's do this water pilot project now. They don't like it when First Nations start affirming our rights, whether it's land or water or air. And you know, those are the biggest things that we as First Nations, Indigenous people have to do, whether it's in BC or any of the other provinces throughout Canada, is we have to start using our Indigenous laws. So just some comments and questions that I have in regards to water and water quality and water quantity, because that is not really happening. So for that, thanks for the invitation. Give me the time to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. That your comments ring so true with there not being enough accountability for crossing jurisdictions and a lot of siloism. So there was a mistake on the breakout group. So is it Macho? I'm gonna get to you, but what's probably gonna happen is that we're probably gonna, in about 30 seconds, 20 seconds, we're gonna go back into the plenary. So I just want you to hold your comments, but if you don't mind, I'm gonna bring you up in the plenary and we'll hear your comments there. Okay?
Yeah,
I don't want you to get cut off halfway through, that's all.
All right, thanks.
Okay. This is probably one of my more favorite topics, talking in terms of governance. that I'm interested to see, are there any perspectives? I'm interested to see what your perspectives are in terms of governance and what should be included in this legislation or things that should be considered in this legislation. Does anyone have any ideas that they want to open up the group with right now?
Yes, Marshall here from Cleveland, Prince George, BC. So in my current capacity as lands manager, I work under the First Nation Land Management Act. One of the aspects that I've realized under that is, it was mentioned in the video, is capacity. So even though we do have the law and we are able to make our own decisions, one of the issues that we face is a lack of capacity. And I think I don't want to see this going down the same route. Where we have the legislation, but we just don't have the boots on the ground to enact what we agreed to. So another thing that I also don't want to see is I would say for want of a better word, absolution of the fiduciary right of fiduciary responsibility of the government to First Nations. So I don't want it to be where we say, yes, we'll do this on our own, and then we absolve the federal government of what they're supposed to be doing. So I think with that said, I would be more in favor of a collaborative kind of quasi co-management agreement going forward. But again, that's just my 2 cents.
That's great. Thank you so much for those comments, Michelle. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that over the last few sessions that we've had, we've heard that capacity is definitely an issue and a concern, and it needs to be addressed as well too. I'm sorry, I'm probably not going to pronounce your name properly, so please help me out here. Is it Lahaidi?
It's Cleidley Tinay, the First Nation.
Oh, sorry. And your name?
My name is Zawad Abedin.
Oh, okay.
So I work with Cleidley Tinay in the capacity of the manager of capital projects and asset management. So in Cleidley, we recently started this practice to bringing all those maintenance public works activities into one umbrella, so that we can ensure the better asset management and which will lead to actually ensure efficient and better financial management practices. So regarding the water system, what I would say is like echoing Michelle here, the collaborative approach has some pros and cons, definitely. And one biggest con, you already said, like the timing. It's really important, and that's never going to match. Like one First Nation or one community's priority will not match, may not match with others. So, but the good thing about the collaboration is like when we do our part of the job, and we find out our priorities and how find out how to questions, then if there is a if there is a body or like a middle organization which can actually support or like put further explanation and justification to our identified priorities and how to questions, that makes the decision making authority more favorable to our needs, and that basically speeds up the process. So I think, in my opinion, what we need to do is like to find out the cons of having a collaborative approach, and to also find out how to eradicate or reduce those cons to get the full advantage of the pros.
Great suggestion. Sorry, I'm just writing these down. So would you say that the tools to support is just as important as the approach?
Absolutely. And what I also think is like it is very important that when we identify something and we are towards it, we need to ensure from the First Nation perspective that we use the dollars in the best way possible. So that middle organization or collaborative approach can also guide the First Nations that how to best utilize the fundings we receive. For example, when we do the work scatteredly, that will have less efficiency in the usage of the funding, rather than when we are doing this is a like in a structured approach, like the best practices of asset management, for example. So these are kind of the things where these platforms can become handy, where we can actually share the knowledge from one First Nation to another. And sometimes when everyone is at dark, that middle collaborating organization can come into play and let us know what to do and how to do it.
Great, thank you. Those are great comments. Thank you so much. Jordan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just real quick. So I'm from West Bank First Nation, and what we did when it came to providing clean drinking water for our people, we just asserted our rights. We put a pipe into the lake and we said, we're drawing water out of here and go ahead and try to challenge us. It was way back in the 90s, and there was no challenges because, like it was mentioned before, legislation does not provide our rights. It's inherent to us. And so we just did what was necessary to provide, not just for our members, but for the 10,000 non-members that live on our lands as well. One issue that I have, I definitely don't support the idea of a status quo approach because it's not working. It takes away the idea of unity. West Bank is located in the central Okanagan, but our watershed, our water basin comes from the Columbia River. So trying to assert rights at a nation level is very difficult because we're working in the Canadian side of the border where the water, flows out on the American side of the border. So there's a lot of discrepancies, not just between our respective Canadian and American governments, but even within our own nation, to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we all understand we all drink from the same source and we're all responsible to that. The other concerns I have is locally within the central Okanagan, there's various irrigation districts that, with quotation marks, oversee water. We literally just had a presentation yesterday from one of those irrigation districts that thought that they were doing the right thing and reaching out to West Bank and saying, oh, we're making some changes to the watershed here, and we want to know what your plans are for your untouched, pristine lands that we have no intention on developing on up in the mountains. Can you tell us what your 10-year plan is so that we can factor in that when we do the upgrades to the irrigation district in our area? They patted themselves on the back thinking they're moving towards reconciliation because they're consulting with us. We had no prior engagement to understand what they were coming to our table for, or what the discussions were about, but they expected us to have an answer ready for them, which was, it's great that they're reaching out, don't get me wrong, it's a good first step, but it's not with the right questions or the right ideas. Again, going back to the idea that our rights to our water is inherent. Our water comes from the mountains. We live at the valley bottom, but our water comes from the mountains here. And so we have to not only take into consideration what we're doing to provide clean drinking water for our people, but our laws, our traditional laws, acknowledge that our responsibilities aren't just for the people. It's for the animals, for the plants, and everything else that benefits from clean, healthy water as well. And so as much as I want to make sure that this legislation is setting our First Nation people up with healthy drinking water, doesn't really matter if we're not taking into consideration the laws of the land, the respect for the animals and the creatures and all the plants and medicines that keep that water clean for us. And so that has to be all inclusive of ecosystems, of biodiversity, especially here in British Columbia, but also sets that tone that says to local irrigation districts that we're willing to work with you, but it's based on our terms. It's based on our understanding of water flows. Right now they're having an issue with their water intake not being positioned properly because nature is changing the course of the river. So they want to manipulate that river so that it continues to flow to that pump. The reality is water is changing the landscape. So we have to adjust to the water. It's always going to go where it needs to go. That is our laws. That's what we recognize. But there's so much human manipulation to our systems that is polluting our waters more than is providing us healthy, safe drinking water. As mentioned earlier by our youth representative, that there's a lot of pollutants that enter our water systems that we deem as clean and clear for us, but they're poisoned with things like chlorine. So I don't support the idea of a status quo approach. I'm hopeful that a cooperative approach would be helpful, but I don't think it's strong enough that puts Indigenous laws and people and communities first and foremost. So we have to work towards that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Great points. I'm going to go to Valerie, if you don't mind. I'll come back, Michelle, to your next comment. But Valerie, we haven't heard from you yet. So would you mind sharing your thoughts with us?
Thank you so much, Amy. I also want to echo what Mr. Coble just said. I agree completely that the water and the land belong to the community. In my previous life as a band manager with a small community in northern BC, I was able to work with them and determine that they were actually misplaced in 1951 and scattered to the winds. So ended up on 11 tiny little reserves. And we held Indian Affairs to account. They had no potable water. The water that was coming out of the taps was beyond disgusting. So we held them to account. We took them to task. And we hired a regional water expert who came up and said, "What do you need?" I said, "Give me every possible way that water can be brought to this community." He said, "There's got to be a dozen ways." I said, "Well, I want 12 different reports." So he provided those 12 different reports. And at the end of the day, Indian Affairs invested $14 million in building a water treatment plant. And we shared that water with the local community. So it can be done, holding them to task that they made a commitment in the Indian Act to provide potable water to our in perpetuity needs to be recognized. And echo what Mr. Coble said, I don't think a collaborative approach, given the kinds of geography that a lot of our communities have, there's that challenge. But at the same time, partnership does build strength to the situation, and I will definitely be monitoring this discussion. I'm new to my role with Ms. Gonleth. I literally just started, so I'm getting my feet wet again. But thank you for allowing me to speak. Masicho.
Thank you, Valerie. I hope you will stay engaged. I think it's really important to have those community voices at the table guiding legislation like this. Greg, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, you bet. No, I love those. Appreciate those words, Valerie. Those are super huge. Oh, hopefully you see my face here. Yeah, that's it's one of the things High Bar is starting to do right now here is it's needing a plan. So Valerie, you said those words. I just love those words that you said there, right? We came up with a plan. We used a second consultant. We came up with a plan, and boom, the government did it. I think that's so key to a lot of the things that we're doing right now is just needing that plan, a solid plan. And that's exactly what we want to keep, right, or start doing here, right? And that's it touches on that Mr. Coble's words there as well. So he's kind of referencing what a plan for the hills was, right? A plan for the animals, right? So it's just that plan, and that's the power of a plan is so important, right? And I think if there's anything that we can take away today, is that we come with a super awesome, well thought out plan. With our own communities, our own nations, and I think that's going to be a lot of the success that we're going to see today or in the near future is all going to be on solid planning, right? So, thank you, Masi Cookstrom.
Thank you for those words. I'm a planner by trade, so whenever everyone talks about making a plan, I can definitely get behind that. I'm going to go back. Michelle, did you have another comment you wanted to make?
Yes, just going strictly on the governance section, and it's related to a comment that Zawad made earlier in terms of that intermediary group or body. Thinking about it, would we want that to resemble or to be a resource center? So we'd probably have that overarching federal or provincial body, but then the intermediary would be a resource body to help individual First Nations based on their identified priorities. So for example, that resource center would have water specialists, and anybody who is just related to water quality and water management who could help us along, not necessarily be our consultants, but provide real expert knowledge to us in terms of how we go about organizing ourselves and doing not just governance, but also day-to-day management.
Great idea. It's always good to be able to share resources and know that the knowledge that you're getting is good, solid knowledge. Chief Spahan, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I think Zawad had his hand up before I did. So
Okay.
if Zawad has something to say before I do, I'll let him go first.
I'm
So what-
sorry, I actually did not lower my hand. Sorry about that.
That's what I thought, but thank you, Chief.
Yeah, thank you. You know, going over these options and what we're doing now in our water pilot project here in the Nicola Valley, and it took the 5 chiefs of the 5 bands here in the Nicola Valley to approach the provincial government to do this water pilot project. And you know, every band is different. And I say that because between the Coldwater band, what happens in our backyard compared to what happens in Upper Nicola's backyard are totally opposite. Like, we're in this water pilot project together as the 5 bands, but in Upper Nicola, they have flooding problems during the freshet season. Whereas Coldwater has drought problems in the summertime. So 2 totally opposite. Looking at the 3 options about how to move forward with this, you know, I could say we're probably working on 2 and 3, but they don't even work. Like trying to make sure that we get work done as co-governance working with the province of British Columbia. And I like that it was brought up about capacity, and right now we do have the capacity, but we still have to remind the provincial government and the federal government should also be reminded we're in a pandemic. And trying to move forward with our water pilot project has its challenges. And especially, you know, trying to, I hear from our staff trying to connect with knowledge keepers within our communities, and there's 5 communities doing the pilot project. You know, it's not that easy. Communication is one of the biggest problems we have, and we do have Wi-Fi here in Coldwater, but it's not what do you call that?
Stable.
Fiber optics. It's very unstable. Even when we have our chief and council meetings, our councillors get cut off because it's unstable. So communication is one of the biggest problems. And, you know, we do have the capacity for our pilot project, but trying to find people during a pandemic and what's going on, you know, and to get things done, like I'm not sure how it's done in other communities or if they're in lockdown or isolation, but cold water is, and you know, it's a huge challenge when we have people coming into our community who are not band members. We have a process in place where if you're a non-band member and you're coming into our community to do work, you got to stop at the office, check in, pick up a lanyard, and then go do your work. And at the end of the day, you stop back in, check in with us, and drop off your lanyard. That way, we know who's in our community and what they're doing, and it holds to account. So when band members ask, they have their lanyard there. So some challenges about what's going on, and you know, we've been having other meetings with First Nations Fishery Council in regards to the water roundtable here in BC. And I've attended the AFN water forums that happened in Vancouver and back east before COVID. And, you know, I'm really glad to see that we're having a little better turnout for the First Nations here in British Columbia, because, you know, it's a huge, should be one of the biggest priorities amongst leadership anywhere in Canada. Gukstam.
Thank you. Chief Nelson, the breakout room will close in about 40 seconds, but if your comments are quick, we'll take them now. Otherwise, I'll wait till we get back into plenary, and then you can make your comment. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll get back to our water here. There's a village down below us, non-native, and they, when I communicated with
So any comments right off the bat? Any comments right off the bat about First Nations jurisdiction? Yeah, thank you, Sophia. It's not even 4:25, it's 1:25. You guys are probably looking at me like I'm totally crazy. I'm in Ontario, just so everyone understands. I've already had my 1:25, so this is why I'm getting confused here. All right, so moving back to the discussion topic. Is there any comments or suggestions about how to set out First Nations jurisdiction to protect source water? Are there any communities now that are working on source water protection plans in your region? Any comments here?
Ibar is trying to establish some protection for their water, like the farm, the ranches around in Clinton too. They don't know how much water they're using. You don't know how much snowfall is up there. So if you don't have all these information down the road, you might not have any water. You know, like you got to have this information up front so that if you have a dry season, you know that too. You got to protect your fish and your salmon too. Like if you take too much water off there, you're creating less water down in the river, so that everything is associated with that. You know, like the fish will have warmer water coming up, and your animals will have less out there too, you know, like, and if we don't know how much water everybody's taking, how do you know when to cut back or stop it, you know, like, or hold back on it, you know?
Yeah. That's a great point. So just based on, if you can go to your reactions button and let me know what you think about this, yes or no. So do you think that when we talk about capacity and ensuring that there's the necessary capacity, do you think that also includes data and the ability to collect data for that decision making?
Yeah, it does. You know, like if you don't know how much is there, how can you say how much to use? You know, like, or in a dry season, or when you collect when did you collect the data in the dry season, in a wet season? If you collect it in a wet season, you know, like, and you're in a dry season, you're way out to lunch.
Yeah, that's right. So when we talk about capacity, it's more than just about, don't get me wrong, water operators are so valuable, but there's also capacity in other areas as well too to consider, right? Chief Spehan, did you have something that you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, yeah, I think
Yes.
water quality and water quantity is huge. Part of our the stipulations made from the court in BC here with Trans Mountain was they had to do a hydrogeological study, water study, here on Coldwater IR #1 to determine the size of our aquifer for our sole source drinking water. And you have to do that at different times of the year because the seasons are different, right? So this is an ongoing study. Our consultant company recommends that the study should be at least 4 years, but we're only doing it for 2, which kind of gives you a little bit of information, not the amount that is recommended by the consultant company, because to have more data gives you better information of the quantity of water at different times of the year. And you know, and we talked, there was a little bit of talk about the watersheds, and I think that is one of the most important topics. What the Coldwater Indian Band is doing here in our valley, the Coldwater Valley area, located close to Merritt and Nicola Valley, is trying to look after our watersheds. In the Coquihalla Valley is one of the most important watersheds, because not only does the Coldwater Band depend on that, the city of Merritt depends on that as well too. So having municipalities at the table is very important. Making sure that everybody's been sitting at the table. And I think, you know, with the water meetings that I've been attending, and I don't see too many of them in British Columbia here, but throughout Canada, and being at the water forums in back east in Ottawa before COVID, not too many bands or First Nations had water stewardship plans. And those should be one of the highest priority for each of the bands, because that tells you who's sitting at the table, what needs to get done, how our Indigenous laws fall into place around jurisdiction and that. You heard me talk about the music festivals in Merritt and trying to get accountability on that. You know, I think raising your voice both at the provincial level and the federal level, and holding the government accountable to what their platform was when they were getting elected to where they're at. Because everybody knows what Justin Trudeau said when his platform was to get rid of the water drinking advisory, boil advisory by this year, and that hasn't happened.
Mhm.
You know, I've mentioned that to the Prime Minister at the AFN national meetings, and I also invited him here to Coldwater Band to have a look as to why we went to court to save our drinking water with Trans Mountain and the government of Canada, and what they're not doing. So I think, you know, there's a lot of questions, and there needs to be a lot of work, and you know, we can't do it alone. Like with our water pilot project, we're doing it as the five bands of the Nicola Valley. And you know, when you work together with other bands in your area, you get noticed. But when you try to do it by yourself, they're not really going to notice you.
Mhm.
But you know, the very first time I attended the water forum back east, I think it was in Ottawa, you know, I met this one chief over there who they had water being delivered to their band for the past 25 years. And that's really sad because, you know, he said in 25 years, the government of Canada has been paying to supply drinking water for us. In all that time that they spent money on that, they could have dished out even more money to get a brand new facility built. But the government of Canada refuses to do that. You know, that is the lack of accountability by the federal government. And, you know, I was just talking to my dad at lunchtime. My dad is going to be 81 years old. He told me a story, and this goes back to what the BC AFN Knowledge Keeper said during the opening remarks and prayer this morning was, you know, my dad was 5 or 6 years old when his grandmother told him, yeah, we're going to have to pay for water in the future. So the elders know about it, the grandmothers and the grandfathers, no matter where you were in Canada, they knew what was going to happen. And it is happening.
Mhm.
And unless we do something about it, you know, and try to change the ways that the government is handling what's happening in our environment, especially with climate change, you know, we're going to run out of drinking water very, very, very fast.
Mhm.
So some comments and that I have. Gukshtem, thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Chief. I think a lot of First Nations are really concerned about climate change and its impact on water, source water, and water protection. And going back to the comment that was made this morning in the Menti word bubble about not limiting, right, to make sure that the legislation is broad enough to be able to incorporate things that we're not even aware of yet, right? Are there any other comments about source water protection and what could be examined and considered in the legislation? Just going back to what Chief was saying, one of the other projects that I'm working on for my community is actually doing a water connection strategy. So we're a really large First Nation. We have 27,000 band members and 13,000 on reserve. And we only have about a third of our community is connected to water. So I'm working now with my council on developing a connection strategy for the next 10 years to make sure that all residents have access to safe water. And I remember when I was a child, my grandparents didn't have running water in their house, but they had like a old dug well that they used to get their water from. And they just used to put in a pail and pull their water out. And that's how they drank from the well out of a bucket, and you boiled the water, do the dishes and things like that. And I was just thinking now, going back to the comment about the source water protection, is that I don't think that there are very many people in our community now that would do that, just because the impacts of the groundwater and how you can't even be sure that the water that's coming out from the ground now is safe enough for consumption. So the source water is definitely a concern. Is there any comments about any other thoughts about source water and source water protection related to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things is too, we've had a water bottling plant just outside of Clinton. They're trying to start, and it's going to send the water that they bottled to China, and we've been trying to stop it for 2 years. One of the things is when stuff like that is going out of the country, and these bans across Canada that haven't got no safe drinking water, you can shake your head in that stupidity. And with they have a bottling water plant down at Hope, and they pump as much water they want out of there, and there's no control on it, and the government gets pennies for the water down there, which is very unreal. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. It is concerning. I think when you're shipping it outside of the source water region, it also begins to impact them too, because when you're in the region and it kind of recycles, right? You bring it out from the region, but it goes back into the region. So it's replenishing the watershed, whereas when it's being shipped out of the watershed, you don't have that replenishment happening. So definitely cause for concern there. Are there any other comments about, I know earlier we had talked about jurisdiction and the inability and the siloism, I guess, when it comes to protecting the source water in the various jurisdictions. Are there any comments on that? Yeah, Chief Speehan.
Yeah, one of the biggest topics that we're having as the 5 Nicola Valley bands right now is water licenses in our backyards. The reason this topic became very important was just past IR number 2 on Coldwater here. They did a blanket permit for 10 water licenses in one permit. And, trying to determine how people use these water licenses is very, very important, because, one rancher, he has 4 licenses. Well, he has totally downsized on his cattle. He gets, he used to get about 4 or 5 crops in 1 year. He's down to about 3 crops. He actually only needs 1 crop or less to sustain his cattle. The second and the third crop are just money-making crops. Another ranch close to the Coquihalla Highway, how do you say it? He doesn't own cattle. He doesn't own horses. He does it as a hobby, and he gets about 2 or 3 cuts in a year. And that's disturbing. Like, if people are going to do it as a hobby, they should only be allowed enough water for 1 cut. Whereas if you do own a ranch and you need hay to sustain your cattle, then yeah, get at least 1 or maybe 2 at the most. But the ones who are doing it as a hobby, that's a real big question of how do you deal with that. And it's very concerning, because the provincial ministries, and I've talked about this in the past about how they work in silos, such as the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Transportation and Highways, Forest Lands and Natural Resources. They don't sit down and talk with each other. This is the first time that we actually had 3 ministries working with the 5 bands in our water pilot project. But trying to come to an agreement how we all work together, is a different story. But trying to figure out, how do you determine which licenses should be authorized and which ones shouldn't be? That's one of the biggest frustrations, because the environment has changed due to climate change. And, you just read the news and the reports about what's going on down in California. That's south of us.
Yeah.
How long is it going to take before that actually starts happening in our backyards? So those are questions that we need to talk about. One thing we're talking about is doing a moratorium on water licenses in our jurisdictions. Cookstam, thank you.
Thank you. Great comments, Chief. Thank you so much for that. And there's a similar concern here in Ontario, and they actually have had a moratorium on water permits just for that same reason. Is there's just not enough data being collected to understand what the true impacts are long-term on all of those companies and industries drawing water from the groundwater. Are there any other questions or comments about source water protection that should be included in the legislation? Well, we are only a few seconds out. So if there's no other comments, we can go back to the main plenary. If you look down at the bottom right hand of the screen, it says leave room. Click. Great. Is there somebody in the group, in the plenary or in the breakout group here, that was talking about the asset management plan this morning, or was that Jordan? I can't remember. He wasn't able to stay for this afternoon.
Yeah, it was me.
Okay. So did you want to give us some insight about how is that working for you in your region or in your First Nation?
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. It's probably my connection.
Are you already implementing asset management planning in your First Nation?
Yeah, we are kind of in the process. So we started with a maintenance management plan at first. So that was that approach or that step was taken a couple of years back. So now we have a maintenance management plan in hand. And now what we are doing is like we are doing the full inventory evaluation for the assets to establish a proper TCA, tangible capital asset register. And we are also formulating the asset management policy and the asset management plan. According to those two items, we are also parallelly purchasing or in the process of purchasing in an asset management tool, which will help us to gather all the information in there. And after that, that will actually automate our O&M activities. And once we are into that system for a couple of years, then that will be able to help us in the life cycle management and also all the forecasting of the financial numbers we need to do. For example, at this moment, I cannot say for sure what are the amount I need for O&M activities, but once we are in that system, I will be able to say that for sure, and I will be able to more plan in a better or efficient way for the future years.
That's great. So in your experience, is there anything that is missing or that you could suggest to other First Nations to help them in their process of going down this path?
So I can share my experience how we started. So basically, we started with the FCM self-assessment tool. It is a very nice tool out there. So we or any First Nation actually can self-assess where we stand, because you can actually practice, actually start with the best tool or best thing in the world. But if we are not being able to use it, then there's no point, right? So first thing is we had to educate the relevant people, the maintenance crew, the public works guys, about the importance and the need of the asset management, we had to find out that where we stand and from where we need to start, because asset management is necessarily a journey. So we need to know where we are, and that's how we plan. So FCM tool was the first thing to start with, and we tried to do most of the works in-house rather than going to consultants or like somewhere else, so that we actually develop our skills. And once we are there, we can operate these in-house as well, which reduces the dependency of third parties, and also that creates the confidence in the crew that we can actually maintain our systems by ourselves.
Great. That's so, and FCM, when you say FCM, is that Federation of Canadian Municipalities?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Great, just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. I from my experience, I really think asset management is a very important tool at this point for the First Nations to better manage their assets. But at the same time, it's a kind of a new concept, I would say, in the First Nations, to the First Nations. So it's really important to gather everyone together in this platform so that we can share our knowledges. That is very important. When we started, we had a very little information in front of us or examples in front of us. We had to research a lot in-house, but once we know who are interested in there, or even if it is possible to make this as a requirement, then I think we can the First Nations can come together and help out each other, and that's how we build a stronger community in asset management as well.
Great comments, thank you. Does anyone else have any other suggestions that could be used to help guide funding arrangements and funding mechanisms for this legislation? I think that I really like the approach of the education, and I think that we do kind of skip that sometimes when we're looking to implement new systems, is that change management and that education of why it's important to do that. So I really value that. Thank you for sharing that. What about anyone else? In terms of all the conversations that we've had so far, looking at talking about source water, we're talking about all governance, what sorts of things need to be considered in order to have proper funding to have access to safe drinking water? Yeah, Chief.
Yeah, I think making sure that you have firm commitment from government, because you know when we started our pilot project, they said, oh yeah, we'll make a commitment, and we had 3 ministers to sign the document with the 5 chiefs. And then after the first year went by, and then the second year, and then all of a sudden, oh, we can't give you the funding for this project. So making sure that there's firm commitment from the government that money is going to be there, and that money is not gonna disappear. But also making sure that when you receive the money and when the money's got to be spent by, and making sure that the money can be carried over. And I say that because, you know, with COVID in place, you know, it has set back part of our pilot program project, and you know, we're with the amount of staff we have working and they're not in the office, makes it even more challenging. So making sure when those funds need to be spent by, when they're to be received, because I know talking with our staff, different funding mechanisms didn't arrive on time. So when monies don't arrive on time, you can't start projects that were put in place, right? So just some comments on the challenges that we were being told for our pilot project. Kuksjam, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Yeah, so what?
So thank you, Chief, for those kind words. Basically, I would like to share one more thing here as well. Sometimes it becomes really difficult, like to utilize the funding amounts we receive. Like if it is for financial year of 2020-2021 and it's coming in like February 2021, there is no way we can spend that. And we need to make sure that this deferral process and also the recovery process is being done or being carried out with a coordination with the First Nations themselves as well, because we also want to use make the best utilities of those funding dollars, right? So it's a kind of a back and forth should be done, rather than just putting out a notice that, well, you didn't spend this money, we are taking it back. And afterwards, what we need to do is that back and forth. Eventually, if we can start that bit earlier from both sides, then it's better. And second thing is like from the example of the ensuring better financial management system, there is FMB, like Financial Management Board, who are certifying the First Nations for in 10-year grants and things like that. So in this kind of O&M fundings, when we are talking about this legislation as well, there might be some requirements set out to the First Nations governance as well, that, well, if you have a asset management structure, for example, in place, you are going to get benefit in your O&M contributions or like funding applications, things like that, so that we feel motivated as well to make our governance system or our own administration a little more efficient as well. There will be motivation from our side, but this could be some ways to like bring everyone together into the place, so that at the end of the day, the funding which are coming in are utilized in the best possible way.
Great comments. Thank you so much for that. That makes a lot of sense. Are there any other comments or questions about this? Are there any water operators on the call that want to provide some insight of where you think
I'm a water operator. I was actually just like, with my band, how we like how it says competitive funding. I think that's kind of part of how we get our funding, because we're like getting a new water system and such, and it's gonna connect with a oil field plant down the road. I think I'm new to the job, so this is what I've been told. And but yeah, why would you want to take out competitive funding? Like, you know, it seems to be helpful to us, because we're like, oil field companies want to help us to get to our land and such. But like, you know, it's to get to stuff that they already own. It's to get, you know, access to their stuff that's already theirs. And like, I'm just saying, like, why would you want to eliminate that? Like, it seems to help the communities around the Fort St. the Peace region. It seems to help the communities around here.
Delaney, did you have a comment to that? I just saw you turn your screen on, that's all.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Derek. I think in the sense, I totally hear what you're saying. I think in the sense, the perspective that we wrote eliminating competitive funding from is, maybe it's not as much in your region, but I know in Ontario and Quebec, there's oftentimes competitive funding between nations with the provincial governments and the federal governments to give, okay, so this nation wants funding to get a new water treatment plant, but this nation wants funding for this, and they have to kind of compete in that way to get a really limited amount of funding. So it's kind of like always a loser and a winner scenario. So it's eliminating that type of system. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
I
But
understand
anyway,
that.
yeah, but thanks for sharing though. That's interesting too, because I haven't it's an interesting perspective. I haven't heard about that.
Well, this is like this legislation thing that we're talking about. This is
Mhm.
about the BC part of it, right? Like all of us are
Exactly.
from BC, right?
Exactly.
I'm just like it should, like how you're saying that these committees should be made up of these areas, of all the provinces, all the territories, right? Like it should be localized to that, because around our Peace region, we get help all the time from the oil field companies, and it's just so that just threw me off, and I wanted to try and clarify.
Definitely. And I think, it's exactly why we're kind of holding these sessions, is to hear like I'm not from BC. So it's interesting for me to know, okay, like this is the scenario here. So it's like, we can change the wording of that and also make sure we're trying to make it like a national in scope, but also still reflective of the regional issues too.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, Derek, because the more feedback that we can get, the better that the legislation can get, and the more that it can reflect all the different regions. So thank you for sharing that.
And like with ours, it's like, it's kind of just the community, the First Nations around Fort St. John, Fort Nelson, because those are oil field boom towns, and they fight to get in with us. So like, that competitive wages helps our communities. Like our community has gotten a workout gym. Our water systems have gotten slowly better. We got a new store. We've added extra irrigate or sanitary and such equipment to our lifestyle here because of competitive wages. So and then just I like the one idea of having everybody kind of give a little bit to the cause so that everybody can get something out of it. That's it.
Yeah. So I think that the way that Delaney was describing it, there's two different ways to look at it, where with the asset management, or maybe like the proactive approach, is that all of the First Nations and all the regions can talk about what it is that they need, and then the funding envelope gets created that way, in the reverse, as opposed to the way it happens now, where you have only a small amount budgeted by the federal government that needs to go out to all of the First Nations. So there's that competitive perspective between First Nation to First Nation, because they never budget enough for it, right? So we're trying to flip that model around, where it's actually based on the true need and not about, like Bing was saying, this arbitrary number of who knows where they choose these budget numbers from, right? So, but yeah, I can see how it would be helpful to your community to be able to have those external partners, and how external partners could also help with your own community development. So thank you for those comments. Great. Is there any other comments about funding or finance that could contribute to the development of the framework? So Derek, if you don't mind if I put you on the spot again. I know in a lot of other sessions we've talked about capacity. Do you find that your water operations are at capacity? Do you have enough people working there? And what is it like actually working in your water treatment plant?
My water treatment plant, like I was pretty much literally, here's the job. And then I started getting training for it, and I started learning all these new things about it. And yeah, we are. My reservoir is our pump house has a chlorination system. It's a bit hard water, but like where else? Like I'd rather have hard water than soft water. And like yeah. Anyways, yeah, ours is good. And how the oil field companies and that the help with the funding and the funding that we get from the Canadian government and the BC government, BCNF, FNHA and such. Yeah, we're doing good, but we're not a very big community. Like I know there's some communities out there like towards Ontario and eastern parts that are like thousands and like, you know, fives and six, tens of thousands and stuff, natives, and us, we're just, I think we're about 280 maybe, and then on reserve we're 100, 110, 120 maybe, and yeah, like we get the like I'm the sanitary guy as well. Like they coincide, waste and good water. And in that sense, you know, we'll get the odd clog just because people are throwing not very good stuff down the toilet, but with me being here, like I've stopped a few disasters. I've made sure that we're not going to flood with sewer and water, and that's mostly from the funding that I get from the competitive wages.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. It's really good to hear. We don't always get those good news stories. We get a lot of bad news stories. So I'm glad to hear that there are communities that are.
Oh, it's a long, hard process for all of this to happen. Like I got the tail end of a good thing.
Oh, that's
yeah.
Good. That's good. All right, if there are no other questions or comments, sorry, if there are no other comments, we will go back into the main plenary session. Oh yeah, Chief Strahan.
Yeah, I guess one of the questions I have would be, how many First Nation bands in British Columbia use water treatment plants or wastewater treatment plants here in British Columbia? Because, you know, here in Coldwater, we still drink water out of the tap, which is still good, but, you know, we're seriously thinking about a wastewater treatment plant because of the amount of money that we spend shipping it out just to get rid of it. So, you know, having information shared throughout the bands here in BC on what's working and what's not working, because just listening to their.
Okay, the breakout rooms are now closed. Amy, go ahead.
Sorry, Chief Strahan, do you just want to finish your thought there about sharing information?
Important for the First Nation bands and the rest of British Columbia here, because, you know, it's something that we're not doing yet, but it's something that we should be looking to start collecting information now. Like I said this morning, like, you know, attending the water conferences back east and then seeing the hard times that the bands are going through in Ontario. It's not if, it's when that's going to happen here in British Columbia, because the federal government are not listening to us, who are the stewards of the lands. So, you know, I remember going to the water conference here in Vancouver, and just about every booth that was there had to do with water treatment or wastewater facility. And I was kind of shocked. But, you know, I did collect cards at that conference, and, you know, I think working towards what we need to face in the future because of climate change is something that all of us as First Nations should actually be thinking about due to climate change. And how can we work with both the federal and provincial government to try to improve water for all of us, but also speaking for the plants and animals who don't have a voice, that how we sustain our life and have a good quality of life within our communities. Kukstem, thank you.
Thank you. So the comment was about information sharing between First Nations, just to be able to determine what kinds of technologies are good and how other First Nations in the BC region are also dealing with water issues and what kinds of partnerships and things that they've made. So that's where that comment was coming from, just to give a bit of context to it. So we are going to have a bit of a break. So we'll break for 20 minutes, come back at 2:20. And then while you're off, if you don't mind, again, go checking out the Menti poll logs, and we'll see those results when we come back from the break. So we'll see you in about 20 minutes. Okay, we got everyone back in the group here. I think everyone's here. Does anyone want to start off with on this discussion topic? And we can go either way. We can talk about what you think some national standards should be, or if you want to get into First Nation culture, laws, and spiritual relationship, we can go there. Any opening remarks? Dr. Point, did you have some comments you wanted to make? I can see you nodding.
I'm going to come that way. I'm just moving things around a little bit here. I was glad to see this, and I knew it would be there, and it was nice to see the video and all the good work that's been happening in BC and across in Canada. And that this discussion is happening is so important. And everybody comes with different experiences, and everybody comes with different knowledge, right? So bringing everybody together is just so important. And I think it needs to start with our culture and our laws and our relationship. And I know that's what I started the session with. You know, the elders told us we are the land. We are our resources. And if we approach our work that way, the elders would say that's you're thinking in the way we were raised to think, right? You got to take yourself as well out of the picture, and they took care of everybody. And I just think back to the elders and growing up, they were thoughtful. They brought the people together just like the way this is being done. They asked for everybody's input. Then at the end of the day, the question was asked, what's the right thing to do here? And of course, they start the session is, why do you want to do this? And you have to be able to explain why you need to do this and why it's important. And I really believe that until everybody has access to clean drinking water, that no one First Nation should be left behind. And of course, I see, my background is education. And here in Stalo territory, I can only speak to the experiences here. And I was asked to work, of course, with our tribal council, and there was a system of how to do business. So the chiefs would send something to me in education, and they would say, what do we need here? How do we move forward? And we'd take that and work on that, then send it back to them. And that's why this session is so important, because leadership has brought everyone together, the different levels, and everybody's carrying part of that answer. So the young man that was talking, you know, sharing his experience, then zoom over to this other man who did the video. You know, their experiences are at totally different levels, but they're giving us answers of what we should do and how we should do it. So I really hope that out of this will come some really key messages to take back to our leadership, because it's the frontline workers. It's the ones that are in the trenches, I say. And I was in the trenches for over 30 years. Ask me anything about education, right? But it doesn't matter if it's education, if it's law, if it's water, if it's social services. The bottom line is listening to one another, taking best practice and applying it. And the government of the day, if we learned anything, it's this, is you cannot compare the North to the South, from the West to the East. And that's why those different boxes that you had, you know, option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4, right, are so important, because what works for Stalo is not going to work for Nekathmuk or the North, right? And understanding that there's 200 and something First Nations in British Columbia with very different needs. And they're the only ones that can tell you what they need. So listening is so important. So I really appreciate the folks that are online, and I really appreciate this session, because we cannot live without water. Everybody carries a part of that answer. And at the end of the day, it's the BC leaders and the AFN leaders that really need to pull everything together and make those, make the needs front and center, with the notion that every First Nation is taken care of. And if one First Nation isn't, then we're all impacted. If one First Nation community doesn't have the basics, it's a shame on all of us. So I really hope that this session will shine a light and be able to provide for every First Nation that they are taken care of. So I'm going to just stop there, but and our culture and our prayers and our spirituality have to be front and center. That's how we do business. That's how we move. That's the difference between us and the larger society, is that we're inclusive of who we are and our traditions and our beliefs and our spirituality. Doesn't make us any better than anybody else, but it does. We're walking with the generations before us and the generations coming in mind, in a good way. To Edith, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I really appreciate your perspective on this. A couple points that I took out that I think are really important is that you were talking about the key messaging need to come from the First Nations. And I think that's important, because the expertise comes from being on the ground, right? And in the trenches, like you said. and you will learn so much about what's happening in your community by working in your community. So thank you for those great words. Thank you. Are there any other comments about standards or regulations, or including the culture and laws into the legislation? Are there any other comments related to this area? Yeah, Chief Spahan.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I was sitting in on this call today, and our executive director for our water pilot project sent me 2 documents, and I didn't have time to read them, but one was 72 pages and the other one was 9 pages, and it had to do with what we're talking about, the regulations in that. And you know, I think more dialogue for these meetings needs to happen. About a month ago, I read this one news report about Indigenous knowledge and how it's being used and how it was not being used, and why the government wasn't using it. And discrimination came into part as part of that news story. And the story was, they focused the story on Dr. Jeanette Armstrong, and she was talking about the silk, Indigenous knowledge in that. And I think that's very important, you know, wherever we are in BC or in Canada, you know, both the provincial and the federal governments have to start really taking it serious on how do we incorporate Indigenous knowledge into all the work that we do, whether it's water or forestry or fisheries or what. You know, the government has never done that, and that's something that they should really think about. And I think that is one of the biggest factors that we as First Nations people have to make sure that we get that message clear across to both governments. You know, when we first started this water pilot project, I looked at one of the representatives and I talked to him. I said, well, what about our laws? And he laughed at me and walked away. And, you know, we're like I said, we're year 3 into the project. And now there's really starting to take us serious about our Indigenous laws, because, you know, our laws and the government, the BC, the First Nations, we are all governments, and we should be equal or higher than the federal government, because, you know, our laws were in place way before the federal government came into place. We've been here for thousands and thousands of years. And, you know, I was having these meetings with DFO and other First Nations in BC, and I kept telling DFO, I said, you know, you've been mismanaging our fish to extinction. Well, one of our staff members went back and looked into the documents that dated back to 1810, when the chiefs approached both the federal and the provincial government, and they told them, you know, you're mismanaging our fish because we're not allowed to get fish like the way we used to. When we got fish, wherever you were in BC, you were rich, because back then it was, we did our fishing the way it was sustainable. But now you look at it, DFO has mismanaged our fish into almost extinction. And the chiefs British Columbia have been telling both governments since 1810 that that has happened. And you know, it's like they still laugh at us to this day, because you see what happens in sports and recreation fishery way over FSC needs for First Nations. And water has a big thing to do with that, because without water, fish cannot survive. You know, water is life and water is sacred. So just some comments I needed to add. Bukstem, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Just if you can show me either with your video on with a thumbs up or with the reaction key, what do you think, Ben, about just taking these comments into consideration? Do you think that there could be an opportunity to develop some local standards based on traditional knowledge and traditional ways of knowing and doing? Some thumbs up. Okay.
Yes, that has to happen.
Great. All right. And then what do you think? Do you think that there is an opportunity or a necessity to have national standards? So be it like minimums or allowables or visions, or do you think that what do you think? What are your thoughts on that? So national being something that's comparable across all First Nations in Canada. When I'm talking national, that's what I mean. Do you think that there needs to be some standards set nationally for expectations? Yes or no? You can say yes or no on your emojis or come on screen, or no, maybe.
That would depend on the First Nation, because you know, here in BC, a lot of us bands are non-treaty, but some of them are treaty. So how does that impact the treaty bands versus the non-treaty bands? That's something that you really have to think about. And it wasn't that I didn't like the videos that were shown. I really did enjoy them and I liked them. But why were none of the videos done here in BC and talked with people here in British Columbia? You know, I understand that maybe it is easier to do videos back east there in Ontario or wherever. But, you know, as you heard throughout this meeting, every band is different. And, you know, I think, you know, if it's going to be done, you know, spread it out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, do a video here, do a video there. Don't just focus in on one area, but that way it gives a better picture of the different waterways. You know, our lakes here close to Coldwater are nowhere the same as the Great Lakes in Ontario. So that makes one of the biggest differences right there. A lot of water that we depend here in the Nicola Valley depends on the snowpack. And is that the exact same within the rest of the First Nations, whether it's in BC or Ontario or Saskatchewan or Manitoba? And how is it all being dealt with? You know, when there's meetings going on, and you know what I'm going to take away from this meeting, all the information is going to go back to my council to get their comments and their recommendations, because you know, when I do a report and they always ask, well, what are your recommendations? Well, I want to hear and I want to know what you guys have to think about it. Because how are we going to gain interest within our own communities to start having our people focus in on the jobs that we need to get done? And I think that's very important, you know, trying to focus in on our youth and saying, you are going to be our new water operator and start telling them that at grade 9 or 10. They're going to laugh at us and walk away. So how do you gain their interest and tell them, well, you know, you're going to be a water warrior. And to be a water warrior, you have to be a water operator. You know, how do you influence that conversation that needs to happen? Well, just some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. I really like that about framing it in a way, because we had heard that in another session, that there's maybe a stigma that goes with becoming a water operator or a wastewater operator, but really is, when you break down the work is so important to the community. Like every aspect of our life depends on those water and wastewater operators, right? So I really appreciate that comment, Chief Spahan, about, you know, framing it in a way that makes it more exciting and takes away that stigma, so that they understand that as a water warrior, this is some of the work that you do. So thank you for those comments. We're about to get kicked out into the main plenary again. So I will meet you back there. I'll just, is there any more questions? We got about 53 seconds. Is there any more comments before we head back into the main plenary?
I just want to say thank you for all the hard work that you guys are doing. I raise my hands up to you.
Thank you. The folks at the AFN have been so great with putting this all together. So I will give you a nod in the main plenary too, when Bing can hear as well too. So I'll meet everyone back in the main plenary room.
Amy, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. So we have one last Mentimeter poll. So the questions are, do you agree that the new legislation should define some national standards and delineate others for local regional development, and must include reference to First Nations culture, laws, and spiritual relationship with water as being important components for the development of water standards? So a lot of yes, one maybe, that's great. And then the next question is the word bubble about key concerns